The other bill covered under this rule is very important as it relates to our nation's national security. H.R. 5351 would prohibit the transfer of any individual detained at United States Naval Station Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. This bill would prevent any of the 61 prisoners remaining at Guantanamo Bay from being brought to the United States or transferred to a foreign country. President Obama's pledge to close Guantanamo Bay started as a campaign promise in 2007. After his election, he signed an executive order declaring that the prison would be closed in 1 year. Thanks to bipartisan opposition by Congress and resistance by intelligence agencies, these efforts have so far proved unsuccessful. President Obama originally planned to bring the prisoners to a new facility here in the United States. Not surprisingly, no state wanted to be the one selected to house terrorists. Members of this body from both sides of the aisle were up in arms. Since that plan failed, President Obama has been releasing these terrorists to foreign countries, most of which are located in the Middle East. So here we are in the waning days of the Obama administration, and I fear that the president may try a new trick to close the prison. In fact, on August the 15th, President Obama released 15 Guantanamo detainees at once. That is the most detainees he's released at one time during his entire presidency. I think it is also important to remember that most of the remaining prisoners are very dangerous. Yesterday, in testimony before the Rules Committee, the ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, Mr. Smith, testified that 41 of the remaining detainees are, quote, considered to be so dangerous as to be untransferable, close quote. So this legislation is necessary and is required in order to keep the American people and our allies around the world safe. One of the main goals of Guantanamo Bay is to keep these terrorists from returning to the battlefield. Sadly, it has become clear that some of the detainees released have returned to the fight against the United States. Now, information on the status of released detainees is hard to come by. The White House has released very few details and hidden almost all the information out of the eye of the American people by placing it under extreme classification requirements. But in testimony before Congress, an Obama official admitted that at least 12 individuals released from Guantanamo Bay have gone on to launch attacks and kill Americans. 12 individuals released from Guantanamo Bay have gone on to launch attacks and kill Americans. During testimony before the House Foreign Affairs Committee, the official testified that, quote, what I can tell you is, unfortunately, there have been Americans that have died because of Gitmo prisoners, close quote. Reports have indicated that it was a former Guantanamo detainee who helped organize and plan the attack on the U.S. diplomatic compound in Benghazi, Libya. Let's not forget that 4 Americans lost their lives during that attack. I want to point out that this problem isn't new under the Obama administration. In fact, reports show that 111 of the prisoners released by former President George W. Bush returned to terrorist activities. And let's be clear, any life lost at the hands of a former Guantanamo detainee is one life too many. These are deaths that are preventable if we just keep these terrorists locked up. You know, Mr. Speaker, we ask our service members to put their lives on the line each day and every day in order to keep the American people safe. How can we ask them to do that while knowing that we are releasing cruel, brutal terrorists back to the battlefield? It is reprehensible. These releases and efforts to close the prison must stop. It is a shame that congressional action is even needed, but that is the reality of the situation. And let's not forget, the individuals still left in Guantanamo are the worst of the worst. The Pentagon told Senator Kelly that 93% of the detainees left at Guantanamo were, quote, high risk, close quote, for returning to terrorist activities. Here is a quick snapshot of the remaining terrorists. Many of them fought on the front lines against U.S. coalition forces in Afghanistan. Some of them served as bodyguards for Osama bin Laden and worked as instructors at al-Qaeda training camps. One person is well versed in explosives and served on an al-Qaeda improvised explosive device cell that targeted coalition forces in Afghanistan. When captured, he had 23 anti-tank landmines. These are just a few examples of the people we're talking about here. We aren't talking about low-level operatives. These are really bad guys. So I fear this president may once again put politics above national security. I fear he is more concerned about keeping a campaign promise than he is about keeping the American people, especially our service members fighting in the Middle East, safe. Ultimately, if we don't keep them in Guantanamo, where exactly do you want these terrorists to go? Do you want them to be transferred into the United States? I would ask my colleague on the other side of the aisle, would he want them in his home state of Massachusetts? Or do you want us to send them back to the Middle East, where we can't control what actions they take and where many of them are returning to terrorist activity? To me and a majority of Americans, the choice is clear. We need to keep these terrorists in Guantanamo Bay where they can do no more harm. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support House Resolution 863 so we can move forward with consideration of these two very important bills. And I reserve the balance of my